I'm Andy Take. I'm a professor of geotechnical engineering, and what that means is that I've devoted my life to the study of dirt. It's exciting. We are here tonight to talk about energy, and yet I put up a first slide of a tailings dam. What's going on? So the idea here is that whether we're mining for energy itself, let's say bitumen, or whether we're mining for the minerals that we need for batteries, solar panels, the copper we need for electrification and our energy transition, all of those require mining. And mining results in a lot of materials that are sand and silt-sized particles mixed with water, and that particular material is very easy to pump, so it's very good on one hand, but it has a strength on the order of toothpaste, which is bad on the other hand, because that means to store it, we can't make a hill out of it. So instead, what we need to do is to put it into a structure where the strength comes from something else. In this particular case, from the tailings dam itself. And that has to be safe. This is a landform. This is going to be around forever in a changing climate, and it has to be safe forever. So the big question is, if we want our energy to be really sustainable, we need to think about how we store mine waste. What happens if that dam were to fail? Well, sadly, we have way too many examples of this. The first one that I thought I would show you tonight, the first one, comes from British Columbia in August 2014. This is the Mount Polley Tailings Storage Facility failure. In this particular case, what happened is this dam had a foundation failure. So the base of the dam slid, that dropped the crest and allowed water to flow over top. That water took tailings with it, and you can see this giant outflow of material. As we're looking through this particular view here, what was behind the dam formerly was up to pretty close to the crest, and now we have this giant canyon. That canyon represents millions of cubic meters, so a meter by a meter by a meter, 25 million cubic meters of material that is then released into the environment. This is clearly not a sustainable practice. 5 years later, we're now going to Brazil. In this particular case, what you're looking at is security footage. Where the green part in the center of the screen is, that's the downstream face of the dam. And what you're going to witness is if you look at that green part, you will see a toe bulge. The crest drops. The dam is sitting there, and in an instant, the thing decides to liquefy. It's turned into a viscous fluid. And as you can see the dam now flowing and the tailings being released, you can see how incredibly mobile that is. How can you have a dam one moment and then the next have it so that it is flowing like a fluid? Let's talk about that. So what I'm showing you here is a little idealized block of tailings and water. The spheres are particles, are solid particles, and the blue spaces are voids, right? The space between the particles. And what we're going to do is we're going to load this. We call that shearing. It's a sort of a load mechanism where we take the top of this and we sort of try and change its shape and volume. And if we do that slowly, and let's take a look at the upper left ball here. That upper left ball had the opportunity to slide into the neighboring void. And so what we saw here is a very unstable format. Like this is very loose. We have, if we shear it slowly, this ability to get a stronger material. What happens if we shear that fast? Well, now this ball here wants to get into that space, but if we do it really, really quickly, that ball is pushing the water in the void. And the water doesn't have time to squeeze out. That dam is huge, right? You have to squeeze the water to the boundary. So instead what happens is the chip bag effect. So if you have a bag of Lay's potato chips, it works with other brands, and it's unopened, and you squish it, the chips, the solid particles, don't feel any of the load. All of the load goes into the fluid, in this case the air, inside the chip bag. And so when we have fast loading of loose assembles of solids and voids, we have the ability to get high pressure. Okay, How does the high pressure lead to liquefaction? Well, in this case, I've gone and I've taken an awesome video from Mark Rober, who is a YouTuber. And Mark one day decided to make a hot tub of quicksand. And before he did that, he came up with this little demonstration experiment. And what's going to happen here is what Mark did is at the bottom of this little tub of sand had a pipe distribution network. And in that pipe distribution network, he hooked it up to a compressed air supply. And so you have compressed air going vertically upwards. It's a hydraulic gradient or air gradient. And when that happens is you have a drag force on your individual particles. If that drag force exceeds the weight of the particle, then essentially you have no contact forces between the particles. And because the strength of a soil is all about friction, if you have no contact stresses, you have no friction. And that means it behaves like a solid. And you can see just really how dramatically, just by pumping air or increasing the pressure, in the case of our tailings dam, we can have this turn into a very low friction material. And then you turn off the air, you get rid of the pressure, it remembers it's a solid again. Here's a hockey stick graph. We don't like to see these because that always means bad news. This is looking at failures of tailings dams. We had PhD student Nayan Rana look at this, and Nayan looked at every single tailings dam failure since 1965. The cumulative y-axis is looking at how much we've lost. The units are in millions of cubic meters, so meter, millions of those. It's over 120 internationally. That's a lot of potentially contaminated material that's been sent uncontrolledly into the environment. And look at this versus time. Mount Poly, that was the event that we talked about in our first video, that we lost 25 million cubic meters. The next year, in Brazil, there was 32 million, and then the second video I showed you is of Feijão, which is about 10 million cubic meters. On the other axis, we have cumulative percentage and 50%. So over about 50% of all the material we've lost since 1965 has happened in the past 10-ish years. So not a great safety record. Canada, on the other hand, is a leader in tailings mine waste management. And it's a lot to do with the phenomenal companies listed at the top. And these companies are investing in people and innovation to come up with safe tailings dams. They are funding our project with NSERC called CanBreach, led by Scott McDougall's group at the University of British Columbia, Steve Evans' group at Waterloo, and my team at Queen's. And I thought I would give a shout out to these 18 people who made the work that you're seeing today happen. So at Queen's, what we want to do is physical modeling. We want to make dams fail when there's no consequences. So Andrea, Kaylee, and Meg made dams a meter tall, and they allowed them to fail. And during failure, we are laser scanning this. We have buried sensors. We are trying to see what are the precursor measurements that will tell us that failure is imminent. Also, what's really, really important from an emergency management and preparedness scheme is how quickly do we lose the water? We put 20,000 liters of water behind this dam. How quickly do we lose that? Because that will tell us how fast and how far the water will go in terms of defining the hazard. Who do we evacuate? How many minutes do they have? Where do we tell them where to go? That was one failure mechanism. Here's a different one. In this particular case, the dam has been designed and it doesn't have a drain at the toe. So instead, what happens is we have a drag problem of the fluid exiting the downstream face of the dam. And as it does it, it grabs soil particles with it, and it's like the dam is melting. We have this retrogressive seepage failure until failure occurs and we again lose containment. Another idea that Megan looked at is, what if we made our 1 meter high dam and said, what happens if you have overtopping absolutely everywhere instead of that single central location? And really, really fascinating, what Megan discovered is that at one point there is an isolated place where the water flowing over is just a little bit deeper. That means it's going to go a little bit faster. A little bit faster means it's going to erode a little bit more. And so that location wins, and we can then measure how quickly the dam breaks, which, as I mentioned, is vitally important for our emergency preparedness plans. So then once we have that information of how quickly we lose our material in a dam breach, we then need to translate that into actionable information. And we do that using numerical modeling. This work is the work of Nagar, and you're looking at a historical failure. Over here, we have a tailing storage facility. There was a breach location, and the base image is an orthophoto. The black line here is the orthophoto after the event, where you can tell where the debris went. And so in terms of protecting people, we need to know that if a breach occurs, what are the consequences? How far will the debris go? Who do we need to warn? Where do we tell them to go? And so the colors you see are Nagar's simulation of velocity, and that the edge of that is the extent of where Nagar model told the debris would go. So we're doing pretty good, and we're really working to come up with these innovative strategies to better understand the consequences of failure. So we've learned that tailings, density, the chip bag effect, density matters. We want to have our material as densely placed as possible. As a global geotechnical community, we also know that water is always the enemy. Water is going to cause this sort of potential for liquefaction, and so we want to keep it remove as much of the water as possible. And so we can also think about other types of technologies in which we can remove the water and store tailings at a much lower moisture content. And so if we want tailings and our energy to be sustainable, we have to think about that in mine waste. Since Queen's is a university, there's also the training aspect of things, right? If we can learn these lessons once, but we have to continually learn the lessons from all of these failures. And so I showed this image earlier, and recruiters always want to hire an engineer who's 20-something years old as a junior with 20 years experience. But right, so let's take a look at all these experts. They've all now graduated, and going from the left to the right, we have Megan, Andrea, and Kaylee. They're juniors, but they've failed 30 dams. They've seen 30 dams, and they've single-handedly destroyed 30 dams, so they know what dam failure looks like. The next person over is Nyan. Nyan is the one who looked at every tailings dam failure since 1965, right? Then we have Nagar and Daniel, who then took those case studies that Nyan created and looked at how well our numerical simulation tools can model those. The others, the undergrads that helped shovel, mostly, there's a lot of shoveling in science, apparently, went on and they enjoyed it, and they become experts in their own right. The other undergraduates went on to work in companies and took these experiences to other companies that I don't have room for on the slide to show. If we are doing our job right as a university, it's not about having somebody come and we train them in the career path they wanted to go on. We want to change potentially to a career path they had no idea existed on day one when they were 17 and they decided to come, right? Who knew you could devote your life to the study of dirt, for example? It's not something that immediately comes to mind. It's really exciting times on West Campus. We talked about the people aspect, but it was also the innovation aspect. So this is a picture from about a week and a half ago. We have this beautiful new nondescript blue building next to Richardson Stadium. It is in delightful Smith engineering blue, I might add. I get to choose the color palette. And inside this building is going to be some incredible world-class infrastructure. We have $12 million from the Canada Foundation of Innovation. And one of the things it allows us to do is to test large particle sizes, right? So if you have a particle size material, say a waste rock, and that is maybe 100 millimeters in diameter, you need a certain number of particles wide and high, and then when you squish it to find out how strong it is. We are building the world's largest triaxial cell to be able to test waste rock for tailings dams. We're also building a centrifuge, a 6-meter diameter centrifuge that when it spins around at a few hundred kilometers an hour, it enables us to do advanced time scaling and try and find the density of tailings where they no longer liquefy. And then we also building at the world's premier pipeline testing facility where we have a box 9 meters long of soil, 3 meters wide, that has a false floor to impose ground motion to be able to make our pipelines more resilient to moving ground. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to come and to tell you some of the exciting things that are happening at Queen's. Thank you very much.